Section 1 of the North Carolina Constitution says, "The equality and rights of persons we hold to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruits of their labor, and the pursuit of happiness." A vote on this so-called same-sex marriage amendment has nothing to do with your personal or religious opinion on same-sex marriage, but it has everything to do with whether or not you believe discrimination should be codified and legalized constitutionally. It has everything to do with whether you believe hate and division should be legalized constitutionally. And I believe, along with the entire NAACP and our more than 130 members of the historic 1000 on Jones Street Coalition, we should never seek to codify division, hate, and discrimination into the very heart and framework of our Constitution. Years ago, when there was a well-funded national strategy by the extreme right to promote constitutional amendments against the rights of some persons, the NAACP's National Director of Legislation and our Washington Bureau Chief, my good friend Hillary Shelton, gave this testimony before the Senate 8 years ago. There is no history of enacting constitutional amendments for the purpose of restricting individual freedoms. These proposed amendments against gay people, he said then, stand in stark contrast to the amendments that have been adopted in the spirit of freedom and liberty. As James Madison explained, constitutional amendments are reserved for certain great and extraordinary occasions, and this is not one by any measure. The truth of the matter is that ultra-conservative think tanks and millionaires are financing a cynical move to trick some North Carolina voters in this year's primary to vote for this amendment. The millionaires who fund these election tricks could care less about who marries whom, but be sure they will marry their money to any issue that they think will affect the vote in the way they want it to go. They want to distract voters' attention from our pressing economic problems to a personal issue of conscience, a matter best dealt with in our houses of worship and in our own conscience. This is a matter of conscience, not constitution. The NAACP, which I lead in North Carolina, and my own Christian faith tradition, both respect people of strong faith and conscience on both sides of the personal, moral, and religious issues regarding same-sex marriage. Founded in 1909, the NAACP currently has more than 2,200 membership units across the United States, with branches in every state in the nation. And our mission for 103 years has been to achieve the equality of rights and to eliminate prejudice among the people of the United States. And that is why the NAACP has always opposed any custom, any tradition, any practice, any law, any constitutional amendment that denies any right to any person. The NAACP does not and has not taken a position religiously or personally endorsing or opposing same-sex marriage. However, the NAACP has a long history of opposing any proposal that would alter the federal or state constitution for the purpose of excluding any group or individuals from guarantees of equal protection under the law. Our opposition is based on our mission statement, which calls for the equality of rights of persons. The issue of same-sex marriage is a matter of conscience, a matter of religious or moral perspective. It should be worked out within one's own conscience, within one's own faith, within one's own heart, within one's own faith community. The North Carolina legislature is not the modern-day Council of Nicaea. And we should not want it to be. Public policy, not personal morality, is what we ought to address in the legislature. How should the government address the public policy challenges of abject poverty, unemployment, poor education, economic justice, caring for those without health care, and equal protection under the law? Those are the moral questions that should be taken up in the legislature. These are the questions that the legislature should be addressing, we should be voting on. We should not allow our tax dollars in our beloved state of North Carolina to put their beliefs in our state's most important document or to dictate the conscience of other people. This is a matter of conscience, not constitution. Who wants to stand up in the face of those whose children are receiving subpar education and under-resourced public school because of bad public decision, and tell those parents that the best thing for their children is not fixing the school but trying to deny somebody else constitutional protection? That's absurd. In the middle of 1.6 million people living in poverty and 600,000 children, and in some communities unemployment as high as 20 and 30% among African Americans, Latinos, and many communities with poor whites. Who will go to those unemployed workers, those poor people, and tell them that the most important thing is to help deal with their lives is not to demand that we work to provide jobs and economic empowerment for their families and for them, but instead for them to work hard at denying somebody else their constitutional rights? That's absurd. By the way, we need to stop for a minute and remember the history of amending the U.S. Constitution. Our nation had to fight a long and bloody civil war in order to amend our Constitution, on paper at least, and to begin to expand its protections to all persons. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment guaranteed all persons equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment provided voting rights regardless of race or previous conditions of servitude. The 19th Amendment guaranteed voting rights for white women. The 23rd Amendment provided voting rights in the presidential election for residents of the District of Columbia. The 24th eliminated discriminatory poll tax in federal elections. And the 26th provided voting rights for younger Americans. No other amendment since that time, the Civil War, has ever restricted the rights of any persons except the two that established and were then repealed on prohibition. Similarly, the North Carolina Constitution has always expanded and extended the equal rights of all persons established in the first section that I quoted above. When we look at the history of the United States and the North Carolina Constitution, there has never been an amendment to narrow protections, but only those to expand their protections to all persons and to remedy past injustice. This amendment goes against constitutional history. Now, the real insult to the civil rights community, and by the way, the NAACP is not a black organization. It was founded by blacks and whites and Jews and Christians. So the real insult to the civil rights community, regardless of color, is that the same regressive, ultra-conservative Tea Party type folks that are suing to overturn the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that are trying to resegregate and rob our public schools of valuable resources, that are blocking workers' rights to organize, that are trying to force us to get photo IDs, which is nothing more than a 21st century form of poll tax, that are trying to cut back on the time and opportunity to vote, that have tried to repeal the Racial Justice Act, they somehow think that the sons and daughters of the civil rights movement cannot see through their Trojan horse trick. That's the real insult. The real insult insult is that they want to use a states' rights trick in the South, the same tactic used against black people in the 1960s against the LGBT community today. The ultra-conservative sponsors push their anti-gay amendment with one hand and then try to restrict our voting rights with the other. They would write discrimination into our Constitution with one hand and then violate that same Constitution by not providing enough money for preschool children on the other hand. This amendment on the one hand, and then they do other things on the other hand. And the reality is, no matter our color, no matter our faith tradition, those who stand for love and justice are not about to fall for this trick. Not on our watch, not this time. We've seen it before. No matter how you feel personally about same-sex marriage, no one, especially those of us whose forebearers were denied constitutional protection and counted as 3/5 of a vote for their slave masters and mere chattel property for other purposes in the old Constitution. None of us should ever want to deny any other person constitutional protection. Someone said to me the other day, and one of the reporters said that they went to someone and asked someone who was African American, well, how do you feel about this being compared to civil rights? And he said that they said, well, it's not the same as race discrimination. And he said, what do you think about that, Reverend Bob? I said, that's the point. The folk who know what it's like to be 3/5 of a person, the people who know what it's like to go through 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow, the people who know what it's like to have to go to this water fountain over here and this bathroom over here, we have a moral obligation to be against all discrimination. Whether it's age discrimination, housing discrimination, child discrimination, economic discrimination, gender discrimination, or same-sex or discrimination. Is it the same? The issue is it's rooted in the same moral philosophy. The NAACP therefore strongly urges everyone to vote against and reject this same-sex amendment and any future proposals of constitutional amendment that would permanently deprive any person in our state of their inalienable rights. The sponsors of this amendment are the same people who have pushed other harmful legislation, like Senator Dan Sukek, who also sponsored the Voter ID bill. Representative Skip Stam, who sponsored the Racial Justice Act repeal. The steering committee of the pro-amendment forces includes North Carolina affiliates of two national organizations recognized as hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Family Research Council, local affiliate, the North Carolina Family Policy Council, the American Family Association, local affiliate, the Christian Action League. The leaders behind this amendment vehemently oppose President Obama's agenda. Did you know some of the real quotes and messages? Listen to what the National Organization for Marriage said in 2008. The strategic goal of this project is to drive a wedge between gays and blacks, two key Democratic constituencies. Listen to what Tony Perkins of the Family Research said. I will go on record, Tim, in saying Barack Obama has been the worst president this country has ever had. Listen at what the language is saying. Did you know that it strips, as the attorney said, legal recognitions and protection for all unmarried couples? Did you hear the legal analysis that the attorney said? This amendment is wrong on so many areas. Now I must say to all of us here, there's one caution, because the goal of this is to divide and conquer. So let me say a few things before I take my seat. Some are saying this amendment's success or failure will turn on the vote of the black church. I disagree with this. This this is another part of the trick, where again they're trying to pit us against one another. It is not the black church will determine how this amendment passes or fails. First is all in how we frame the question. There are some people, from their own personal convictions or religious conviction, if you ask them are they for same-sex marriage, they will say no. But if you tell them this is not about that, this is about the Constitution, and you ask them the real question, do you believe we should put discrimination and division and hate in our Constitution? They will say no. It's all about how we frame the question. Secondly, it wasn't black people who put this bill up in the black legislative caucus. There was no large contingency of black folk going to the legislature in the midst of the worst economic recession we've seen since the Great Depression, saying, I know how to fix the country, let's discriminate against somebody. And it's amazing how the folk on the other side logic work. They can get one or two people now to speak for them, and all of a sudden, that's the black community. We can march 15,000 people to Jones Street, and they say it's just a small group, doesn't really represent. This bill was put on the ballot by mostly far right, white, ultra-conservatives. They may now have a few black people speaking for it, but it wasn't the black community or the black legislature that created this amendment. Our community is too busy trying to deal with economic injustice, educational injustice, inequality in the criminal justice system. We're too busy trying to deal with those who are attacking civil rights and voting rights. We don't have one moment to waste trying to take constitutional rights from somebody else when we see them trying to be taken from us. That is why on these other issues we've got to come together like this. Not just on this amendment. But we got to organize around education and equality. We have to come together black and white around the attempt to turn back voting rights. We need to be together black and white when this legislature, this state, passes the most regressive redistricting that it has done since the 1800s. We must connect the dots and understand that when you pass with that kind of redistricting plan and you stack, pack, and segregate black voters, it's not just after black voters, it's after fusion politics where black folk and white folk and progressive and labor and poor people can come together and elect politicians of their own choice that can shape public policy. We need to understand what's really going on. And thirdly, it's not upon the backs of the black church or black people that this amendment will pass or fail. Something much steeper here. It will pass or fail based on whether North Carolinians want to deal with a soul sickness that this nation continues to struggle with from time to time. And that is the sickness, the soul sickness of the need to find someone or some people to blame for the problems of the nation. The soul sickness of always trying to make somebody else be relegated as different, deficient, un-American, or un-Christian. This sickness is bigger than black and white. But it started from the beginning in this republic, when only white male landowners were allowed to vote. Poor whites couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. They were other. It started from the beginning when African Americans were listed as 3/5 of a person. Slavery was endorsed theologically, sociologically, and economically because black bodies were deemed to possess a lesser humanity than others. It was even in the midst of the church where black people were not baptized in some churches because it was deemed that their black bodies represented the permanent stamp of the demonic. This is deep soul sickness. It keeps right on raising itself. It's never been totally eradicated and cleansed from the nation's body politics. And it keeps going through a metamorphosis. It keeps recreating itself in different forms. It keeps coming back. And now this sickness is trying to once again infect the LGBT community. It's even in a black church thing. See, we say we the people without any qualification in our founding doctrine, just we the people. But the soul sickness that keeps right on recurring because we never fully erase it with the right antibiotics of justice. The soul sickness that keeps right on popping back up is somebody always wants to change the language from we to us and them. And this is the social infirmity that we must confront. It's the spirit, my Pentecostal. It's the spirit of division and the psychosocial need for me to feel good about who I am. Making somebody else be deficient and different and being willing to write it down and enshrine it. And there's something wrong about it. Changing the language from we the people to us versus them. This law is another attempt to move us from we to us and them. It's rooted in a flawed, unconstitutional philosophy that believes you can extract and take away constitutional and civil rights protection from whomever and whenever a majority decides. This is dangerous. Bigger than black and white, bigger than just political chess. It is dangerous. When you seek to allow a majority at any point to be able to vote up or down somebody else's constitutional rights. It's dangerous and it's fundamentally un-American. Let us be real clear what we're fighting against. We are fighting against the very healing, or for the very healing of the soul of the nation. Now let me close in the language of my faith. Because I've said this is a matter of constitution, I resisted some from just standing and discussing this as a matter of faith, because I understand the trick to pit brothers and sisters against one another. But today a reporter told me that the leader of the Southern Baptist Convention, with its flawed social justice history, particularly on the issue of race and other things, challenged the NAACP and said we were way out in front of the faith community. Didn't call me, didn't talk to us, just said it to a reporter. So let me close in the language of my faith. My faith teaches that, as a Christian, that you must ensure justice for the stranger in your midst, even as you would for a family member. The faith I was taught, over 500 years of preaching on my father's side and over 300 years of preaching on my mother's side, the faith I was taught, the faith I once rebelled against, but the Lord found me. The faith I was taught says the mandate of Christian love invalidates any license to hate. Even if I disagree with somebody, the faith I learned said let the wheat and tare grow together. Because I'm not God and I'm too feeble to do the separating. Faith I was raised on said you got to love even your enemies. And those that are pushing this amendment, I wonder what they do when they find their own children are a member of the LBGT community. Do they throw them away? Do they have some usher at the back door censoring people? Do they check sexuality at the door? Do they disown their own children? Well, if they do something that God doesn't even do. Of a God that loves you even when you're not in the right place. According to the faith I learned from my father and my mother, the most important, the real issue is how you love. I come from a faith that even if you believe somebody's a son, we're called to heal them and help them and to bring them in, not push them out. There are those who say that this amendment is the most important moral issue of our time. It is. Where is your condemnation of war? You think this is the most important moral issue of our time. Where is your condemnation of poverty in this country where 50 to 100 million people in the wealthiest nation on earth still live in poverty? Where is your condemnation of racial justice in the prison system where we have 2 million people in prison in America? We're only 5% of the nation, but 25% of the prison population, and 60% of them are black, even though we're only 12% of the population. Where is your condemnation of that? You say, this is the most important moral issue. Where is your condemnation when unarmed teenagers are being shot down in the street for skittling while black and wearing a hoodie? Conservative brothers and sisters, when in the way our society treats the sick and the vulnerable. Where are you when presidential candidates suggest that it would be all right for folk to die rather than have health care? Where is your voice? Do you not read the whole Bible? Do you not know that how we treat the least of these is the great moral category of the faith? Have you not read what Amos said? Seek good, not evil, that you might live, and then the Lord God Almighty might be with you. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. those who make unjust laws, to those who issue depressive decrees to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people and make widows their prey and rob the fatherless. What will you do when the Lord comes and checks out how you have been living? Do you read the whole Bible? Did not you read the evangelist before we came up with something called evangelicalism, when he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners, recovering sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to declare the acceptable year of the Lord. So maybe this is not about biblical morality at all. Maybe it's just a pretense for far-right, ultra-conservative political purposes. As I close, you ever ask my old grandmother, every now and then I feel touching me on my shoulder. She was one of the old mothers of the church. She was one of those mothers that cared for everybody. Fed everybody. She's gone on to glory now. You asked my old grandmother, she was here today, and you asked her if she believed in same-sex marriage, she would say, no, I don't. But then if you asked her, because there's a lot of things she didn't agree with. I know, because I did 99%. I ain't always gonna preach it, y'all. And even now, preachers and all of us are required, even when we correct others, to first be conscious of our own failings. But if you ask my grandmama, should we be discriminating against people in society? Mistreating people, writing them out of the Constitution because we disagree with them religiously? She would have told you clearly what she told me one day when I raised the question with her about not liking somebody because they were different than us. She said, boy, you might not like it or do it, but don't you know better than that? God's done told you we have to treat everybody right. Treat people right. Love people right. Because they are God's creation and not ours. This attempt to turn faith into a weapon of hurt and hate rather than an instrument of hope and love is just wrong. 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 Dr. King was an evangelical, saying this to the media because never again should they allow folk to come on and say, we are the evangelical. I'm an evangelical. But not like those who read half the Bible. The half reading of the Bible is what allowed this nation to have slavery and Jim Crow and racism and classism and militarism without a strong critique from far too much of the faith and church community. Why would anyone try to write people out of the Constitution that God still includes in his divine Constitution? You know, God has some constitutional coverings that just belong to you because you're a human being. My God, my God. Whether God agrees or disagrees with you, he still allows everybody to benefit from the air. That's a constitutional right. Everybody gets the sun to shine on them. That's a constitutional right. When it rains, he lets the rain on everybody. His grace, his mercy, his love is given out to everybody just because you're a human being. And I have a question for all of those that want deny other people fundamental rights. When are we going to learn that we are not God? Can give everybody, every human being, those fundamental rights. Why would we try to write people out of our feeble human constitution? If God can still love, then why do we want to hate and divide? Somewhere I read, by this love, all men shall know you are my disciples. Somewhere I read, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor like yourself. Somewhere I read, whosoever will, let him come. Love and justice are the great pillars of our faith. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is good enough. We don't need to amend that. Equal protection under the law is good enough. We don't need to amend that. These principles have survived the test of time, and anything less is regressive and wrong